Hello everyone, welcome to Starmen's annual Scary Ghost Stories. Today we'll be reading several different stories to hopefully scare and entertain you. But with that, let's just jump right in. Hello everyone, Devin here. I'm going to read Better Be Sure by Sam Meadow. I needed to kill the monster. The 45 in my hands felt heavy though. I could feel it tugging at my wrist, begging to be put down. The decision I was about to make was an impossible one. One I would not wish on any of my worst enemies. My wife stood to my right, tears streaming down her face. She was exactly as she'd always been, only now her makeup was running, and her dripping nose and sniffling was causing her to muddle her words. I love you. I love you. Please stop. Don't do this. Please. Oh, God. My son. My only son. Fresh out of college. Ready to become a man. Was to my left. His tone was marked differently. Dad, fucking listen to me. That's not your fucking wife. Shoot it. I'm your fucking flesh and blood. Mom's already dead. You know it. So do it. Kill it. Please. He started sobbing at the mention of his mother, barely managing to get out the rest of his plea. I carefully looked at them both in the eyes, looking for a towel or a slip to justify the decision, but I didn't find one. I shot my wife between the eyes, and after her neck jerked back, her whole body slumped to the floor, my son was watching his mother's body fall to the floor lifelessly, and horrific thought crossed my mind. Did I kill a monster, or become one? Before my son knew what was happening, I shot him through the temple, and his body crumpled and struck the floor with a resounding thud. I'm sure the monster was dead now, but my job wasn't finished. I shoved the barrel of the gun underneath my chin, rarely uttered the last words. I'd better be sure.
Hello everyone, this is Curtis. Tonight I'll be reading The First 12 Letters by C. Lonquist. The first letter exploded outward when opened, embedding shards of sharpened dimes in the face of the reader, chipping the plaster around her, taking out a stained glass lamp, and obliterating a china collection. The letter said, "Ask for more." The second letter turned the reader's skin to plastic, and when they found him sitting in his chair, it was starting to turn as well. They could hear him screaming from behind fused lips, eyes unblinking, but something shifted behind those unblinking eyes, as if he were trying to move them in his sockets, and the rest of the eye was just pulling against the surface. The whole chair-person fusion shuddered in pain, or maybe ecstasy. It was impossible to tell, and when they cracked the plastic to save him, the contents of the shell spilled across the clean, white floor of the hospital. The letter said, "No luggage." They're not sure what the third letter did, but when they had found the apartment where it had been delivered, the tenants were gone. They assumed that the obscene amount of silverfish had once been two whole people. The wingless insects shimmered in the slanting evening light that pulled through the Venetian blinds, their stainless steel bodies huffing dust into the air as they burrowed through the carpet like lagged teardrops. The letter said, again, "Thank you." They stopped the fourth letter from being opened at first, and spirited it away from the old woman who had received it. She screamed and cried as they pried the unopened mail from her withered fingers, and she bit the men who hauled her away from the small, yellowing envelope. In the SUV, the letter carrier became an opener. To the survivors, it looked like he was crying as he slid a nail under the glued fold and slipped it apart. It looked like he couldn't stop pulling at the paper. When they opened the doors, there was only one person left in the car, impossibly old, eyes blinded and white. They interrogated her before she turned to dust like the others, an image of mummification inside a sterile vehicle. The letter said, "Touch, flee." It was my job to look at the photographs and listen to the recorded audio, to study the letters themselves. Whatever malice they had held was gone after they had been opened, their contents now nothing but a single line centered perfectly on an old-looking sheet of normal printer paper. The words were always written in Arial, 12-point font. They always looked black. They were always the only contents of the envelopes. The envelopes always looked ancient, yellow, with little bits of red around the sealed edges. One of the studies we did said that the red bits contained traces of blood and particles of tongue, but the tests always said it wasn't from a human. We have yet to identify the source. The person who opened the fifth letter was traced in a line against the back of their entryway, like the shadow of a nuclear blast. The house was free of radiation, and throughout the building they found little masses of meat, though they're still working on why the masses were perfectly spheroid and covered in unbroken skin. The worst part was the fact that the burnt shadow had shadowy images of the person's eyes and mouth inside the outline. The letter said, "It's too loud." The thing they found at the trailer home must have been the sixth opener. They had to kill it. They wanted to take it alive, but it had shifted from the floral print couch to the wall, its skin blending perfectly with the faux wood paneling, until it had sunk claws longer than an adult's forearm into the neck of one of the men there. They could see it once the blood had hit it, mostly because it seemed to burn the creature, which chuckled and rasped and wheezed, its dome-like eyes wobbling back and forth. Milky white people suddenly appeared, scalded by the blood, and gazed at nothing as the thing's chest collapsed, amidst the stench of melting leather. The letter said, "Over green hills." There is no documentation on the sixth letter aside from the letter itself. Even the envelope was lost. When the retrieval team had been released from Suicide Watch, only one of them had talked about it, and all she said was, "We shouldn't have done that." The sixth letter said, "We added 2." The seventh letter was found in a mailbox. It had been opened and put back. There was no sign of the opener, and strangely no phenomena. The only thing we could connect to the letter was the fact that for the next 3 weeks, there were people who reported a voice far above the mailbox, screaming from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. every night. Most reports said the screaming was wordless, but a few people said it was about being eaten. The letter said, "Run your fingers along it." Surprisingly, the eighth letter was difficult to retrieve, because it seemed fused to the ground. They had to get a special excising blade to peel it from the metal floor of the refrigerator it was stuck to in the back of an Italian restaurant. The owner of the establishment, the opener, had to be removed the same way, though he had been fused with the ceiling and his body was paper thin. When they dissected him, they said that his organs had been fully intact and working, though they reassured the department that he had been dead when they started cutting. The letter said, "A few of these." The dispensary has tracked the letters since 1981. We have a complete catalog of the hundreds of letters on record. I think we work for the government. I think the letters were written by them too, though no one at the dispensary has an idea of when the next one will be opened. They're always opened. Someone always dies or stops being, depending on how we look at it. I've worked there since 2007, when the letters started coming nearly one a week and they needed more help. I don't know any other employees' names. We all have our own offices. They all seem to be attached to one hallway. I don't think I've been home since I started. The ninth letter hung in the air, suspended by a radiating web of tiny strings, almost like floss. The opener was in 4 parts, and the thing that had pulled him apart hunkered in the various corners of the room, their whipped scorpion-like forms covered in little mouths filled with human teeth. They chittered loudly and kept repeating the name of the opener, alongside another word that the recovery team didn't recognize. The letter said, "It looked sour." The 10th letter was actually torn when they found it, a tiny rift at the top of the plain paper. The radiation from the tear was blindingly intense, and 3 people died trying to contain it. The room the letter was in had begun to invert, or at least that's the best way to describe it. Televisions, air conditioners, walls, and cabinets had slowly begun to turn themselves inside out. The opener had already finished doing so and was slowly expanding. What was left of the opener's organs were now nearly as large as people and pushing against the ceiling. The letter said, "A nest of spines." The 11th letter was found in the woods. The pictures didn't take, neither did the video. But there is audio of the retrieval team talking to someone or something that they would later call the Blue Kin. It had spoken with them, and they responded. The audio recordings are mostly low, guttural, labored breathing punctuated by muffled grunting, and then the retrieval team replying with, "No, we haven't seen him. No, we haven't. No, we're not doing what he asks. No, they're still contained. Yes," they whispered for hours. When the retrieval team had been asked what the Blue Kin's questions were, they smiled joyfully, got confused, and began to sob. The letter said, "A mouthful of hair." The 12th letter took a long time to bring back. Finally, the 3rd retrieval team managed to have 2 members survive. The letter had a lot of blood on it, which hadn't been there originally. The retrieval team had a great amount of video, some from all 3 teams, that showed the little 4-legged things with eyes that shone like LEDs, looking around low counter sides and between the slats of deck chairs, before warbling and hooting and giggling and disappearing out of view. There are a few videos when they move out from their hiding places, and their faces were filled with little rotating knives instead of teeth, lamprey sucker mouths that whined like dental equipment before being forcefully smashed against the people filming them, voices racked with horror and pain before immediately being drowned out by the now packed mouths, filled with glee. The letter said, "Take, take." I looked at my shadow, and it seems like there are too many of them when I walk down the hallways now. We are studying the letters, and I am keeping the stories straight, and not smoking because of the flies. They tell us we are making it safer. They don't say what it is. They don't say who we're making it safer for. I feel like I only ever walk one way down the hall, but I always seem to find the bathroom in my office, with its table and its magnifying lens suspended in the air by a jointed metal arm. There are file cabinets around me, filled with letters. They say nothing, but are they so important? When they hired me, there had been one question at the interview. Who will miss you? Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. This is David, and I'm going to read you a scary story called The Guardians by Dark Alligator. He awoke to the huge insect-like creatures looming over his bed and screamed his lungs out. They hastily left the room, and he stayed up all night, shaking and wondering if it had been a dream. The next morning, there was a tap on the door. Gathering his courage, he opened it to see one of them gently place a plate filled with fried breakfast on the floor, then retreat to a safe distance. Bewildered, he accepted the gift. The creatures chittered excitedly. This happened every day for weeks. At first, he was worried they were fattening them up, but after a particularly greasy breakfast left him clutching his chest from heartburn, they were replaced with fresh fruit. As well as cooking, they poured hot, steamy baths for him, and even tucked him in when he went to bed. It was bizarre. One night, he awoke to gunshots and screaming. He raced downstairs to find a decapitated burglar being devoured by the insects. He was sickened, but disposed of the remains as best he could. He knew they had just been protecting him. One morning, the creatures wouldn't let him leave his room. He lay down, confused, but trusting, as they ushered him back into bed. Whatever their motives, they were going to hurt him. Hours later, a burning pain spread throughout his body. It felt like his stomach was filled with razor wire. The insects chittered as he spasmed and moaned. It was only when he felt a terrible squirming beneath his skin that he realized the insects hadn't been protecting him. They had been protecting their young.
It Came for Us in the Graveyard by Alec Hansen. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was somebody sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any other details other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted, "Hi!" He didn't show any sign of acknowledgement and continued sitting on the old rock. All of a sudden he jumped to his feet, starting running to us on the water, and then vanished in thin air about halfway across the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. I opened my phone and started dialing my mom to come give us a boost, but I had no service. None of us had any cell service. The next 30 minutes were spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy pressure around us. Finally, the car started, and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast, immediately crossing the gates. All of our phones regained cell service. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or a human.
Hello, everyone. Devin here, and I'm going to read Pretending to Be Asleep Doesn't Work by Vicky69. A young boy is sleeping in his bed on the usual night as he hears footsteps outside his door. Peeking out from under his blanket, he looks at his door to see what's happening. His door swings open quietly to reveal a murderer carrying the corpses of his parents. The murderer enters and silently props his parents up on chairs. He then writes something on the wall in their blood, and then slyly hides under the boy's bed. The child, scared beyond belief, can't quite make out the writing on the wall, and he knows the man is under his bed. So like any child, he pretends that he slept for the whole thing and hasn't awoken yet. He lays still as he hears the quiet, heavy breaths from under his bed. An hour passes, and his eyes are finally able to adjust more and more to the darkness. He tries to make out the words, but it's a struggle. He then gasps as he finally makes out the sentence. "I know you're awake." He feels something shift under his bed.
Hello everyone, this is David. I've got a ghost story for you, and it's called They Got the Definition Wrong by Leo. It has been said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I understand the sentiment behind that saying, but it's wrong. I entered the building on a bet. I was strapped for cash and didn't buy into the old legends of the hotel to begin with. So $50 was more than enough to get me to do it. It was simple. Let's reach the top floor, the 45th floor, shine my flashlight from a window. The hotel was old and broken, including the elevator, so that meant hiking up the stairs. So, up the stairs I went. As I reached each platform, I noted the old brass plaques displaying the floor numbers. 15, 16, 17, 18. I felt a little tired as I crept higher, but so far, no ghosts, no cannibals, no demons. Piece of cake. I can't tell you how happy I was as I entered that last stretch of numbers. I joyfully counted them aloud at each platform. 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 44. I stopped and looked back down the stairs. I must have miscounted, so I continued up. 44. One more flight. 44. Then down 10 flights. 44. 15 flights. 44. And so it's been for as long as I can remember. So really, insanity isn't doing something repeatedly and expecting different results. It's knowing that the results will never change. Each door leads to the same staircase, to the same number. It's realizing you no longer fall asleep. It's not knowing whether you've been running for days, weeks, or years. It's when the sobbing slowly turns into laughter.
I'm Billie. I'll be reading from the book Maritime Mysteries and the Story of the Crying Sounds. For long years, there was an old house in Truro, Nova Scotia, that baffled everyone who sought to solve the mystery of the strange sounds. The house was first owned by Hiram Hyde, a pioneer stagecoach operator, on the first runs from Truro to Pictou. This house was ill-noted for the weird crying sounds that could be heard in rooms on the east side of the house on stormy nights. Many attempts were made to locate the cause of the sound, but none were successful in its early stages. Many who heard sounds said that sometimes a change of ownership of a house would cause ghosts, if there were any, to leave. But when Hiram Hyde sold his home to Thomas McMullen, at the time a member of the provincial parliament, and who was known as Nova Scotia's Lumber King, the unearthly sounds continued. After considerable investigation by the new owner, it was decided that the noises might be coming from the branches of an old apple tree scraping on the side of the house. But no one was certain that scraping branches could cause sounds like a baby crying. The tree was cut down, but the sounds continued. Then the suggestion came that if a house felt to be haunted by some restless spirits was moved to a new location, the spirits would be appeased and the crying sounds would cease. The house was moved to a new location on Park Street. In the course of the movement of the house, there was found beneath the flagstones at the front entrance an old decaying box, in which was the skeleton of an infant. To the suspiciousness, this find explained the weird crying sounds heard in the east rooms. Most believe of the finding and reburial of the infant bones, the spine-tingling sounds would cease to trouble the occupants. But the facts of the case are these: with the house in a new location, and the infant body removed, with the house under new ownerships, the uncanny sounds could still be heard on stormy nights. Those sitting quietly in the east room noticed that with the rise of the wind, the unusual sound, like an infant crying, in the night would be heard, and this was taken to be a clue that something within the house itself, perhaps something loose, emitted a sound like crying. When the wind was right, but search as they did in the effort to find something loose, they were unsuccessful. The house was now owned by Thomas McMullen's oldest son, Frank, who, though annoyed by the sounds, did not consider them in a ghostly light. Sometime later, a fire broke out in the house. A part of the room on the east side was damaged. Later, when the fire-damaged section was repaired and remodeled, an unusual find was made. In one of the large chimneys in the fireplace was found a harp that had been built into the chimney. When the harp had been installed by the original owners, it was designed to give sweet music when the wind was right. And the wind was in the right direction in the chimney. But over the long years, the strings became broken, so the wind playing among the broken strings produced the sounds as if a baby was crying. With the removal of the harp and broken strings, all the unusual sounds ceased, and the supposed haunted house was not haunted after all.
Well, that's all the stories we have for tonight. Thank you all for listening. And if you have to sleep with the lights on, no one blames you.